Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Pacific Northwest coast of North America. What comes to mind? Perhaps you see towering totem poles, carved with mysterious faces staring out from the mist. Maybe you picture indigenous peoples in ceremonial regalia, dancing around fires. These images have been romanticized, simplified, and often misunderstood by the outside world for centuries. But here's what most people don't realize about the Tlingit people of Southeast Alaska and the coastal regions of British Columbia. They didn't just carve beautiful art or tell entertaining stories around campfires. They engineered one of the most sophisticated social systems ever developed by an indigenous culture. A system so intricate, so deliberately structured, that it governed everything from marriage to warfare, from economics to spirituality, from birth to death and beyond. For over 10,000 years, the Tlingit have thrived in one of the harshest and most beautiful environments on Earth, a landscape where glaciers meet temperate rainforests, where salmon run so thick they turn rivers silver, and where cedar trees grow so massive that a single trunk could house an entire family. In this world of abundance and challenge, the Tlingit didn't just survive. They created a civilization. At the heart of this civilization lies a mystery that has puzzled anthropologists, captivated historians, and inspired spiritual seekers for generations. It's called the moiety system, a dual organization that divides all Tlingit people into two great houses, Raven and Eagle. Some call it a clan system. Others see it as a cosmological blueprint. The Tlingit themselves know it as something far deeper, a way of maintaining balance in a world that constantly threatens to tip into chaos. Why would an entire culture organize itself around two birds? What hidden wisdom lies encoded in this ancient structure? And why, after thousands of years, does this system still thrive today, guiding Tlingit communities through the challenges of the modern world? The answer to these questions will take us on a journey, not just through history, but through a worldview so different from our own that it will challenge everything you think you know about family, wealth, art, and the very nature of human society. This is not a story of primitive peoples or simple beliefs. This is the story of a civilization that understood something profound about human nature, something we're only beginning to rediscover today. Over the next 90 minutes, I'm going to reveal 3 interconnected mysteries of Tlingit culture that will fundamentally change how you understand indigenous wisdom and perhaps how you see your own place in the world. First, we'll uncover the origins of the Raven and Eagle Moieties, a creation story so complex and beautiful that it serves as both mythology and constitution, both spiritual teaching and practical governance. You'll discover why the Tlingit chose these two birds to represent the fundamental duality of existence, and how this choice reflects a profound understanding of natural law and cosmic balance. Second, we'll enter the world of the Potlatch, a ceremonial feast that appears on the surface to be a simple celebration. But hidden within the Potlatch lies one of the most revolutionary economic systems ever conceived by humanity. A system where wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you give away. Where status comes not from hoarding resources, but from redistributing them. Where the richest person is the one who has given the most. This isn't naive idealism. It's a carefully structured economic philosophy that sustained Tlingit society for millennia and offers profound lessons for our modern world of inequality and excess. Third, we'll learn the sacred art of totem pole carving, not as decoration or tourist attraction, but as a 3-dimensional legal document, a family history carved in cedar, and a spiritual practice that connects the living to the dead, the human to the animal, the physical to the metaphysical. Each figure on a totem pole tells a story, but together they form something greater, a visual language that has preserved Tlingit history and wisdom for countless generations. But this journey isn't just about understanding an ancient culture. It's about discovering timeless truths that speak directly to our modern struggles. In a world where we're taught to define ourselves as individuals, the Tlingit show us the power of identity through relationship. In an economy built on endless accumulation, they demonstrate the strength that comes from generous redistribution. In a society that treats art as commodity or entertainment, they reveal how creativity can be prayer, history, and law all woven together. The Tlingit people have something to teach us, not as artifacts of the past, but as bearers of wisdom that may be more relevant now than ever before. So let's begin our journey into the mist-shrouded forests and salmon-rich waters of Southeast Alaska, where two great houses have maintained balance for thousands of years, and where ancient wisdom still speaks to those willing to listen. To understand the Tlingit moiety system, you must first understand the land that gave it birth. Picture this. You're standing on the shore of the Inside Passage, that labyrinthine waterway threading through countless islands along the coast of Southeast Alaska and British Columbia. Behind you rise mountains so steep they seem to erupt directly from the sea, their peaks perpetually crowned with snow and ice. Ancient glaciers, blue as sapphires, carve their way down through valleys, calving icebergs into fjords that wind deeper than anyone can fathom. Before you stretches the Pacific Ocean, sometimes calm as glass, sometimes raging with storms that can sink a modern ship. The water teems with life, humpback whales breaking the surface with explosive breaths, orcas hunting in coordinated packs, seals lounging on sun-warmed rocks, and beneath the surface, forests of kelp swaying in the current like cathedral columns. This is a temperate rainforest, one of the rarest ecosystems on Earth. Rainfall here can exceed 200 inches per year in some locations. The moisture sustains forests of unimaginable grandeur. Western red cedar trees grow so massive that their trunks measure 40 feet in circumference. Sitka spruce reach heights of over 300 feet. Hemlock and yellow cedar crowd together so densely that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. Carpeted with moss so thick and soft, it feels like walking on living velvet. But here's what most people don't realize about this land. Despite its beauty, it is not an easy place to live. The Tlingit phrase, inequality captures this truth. The land can be harsh. The same rains that nourish the forests can trap people in their homes for weeks. The same ocean that provides abundant salmon can swallow whole villages in tsunamis. The same mountains that shelter communities from storms can unleash avalanches without warning. The Tlingit have inhabited this challenging paradise for at least 10,000 years, though their own oral histories suggest their presence extends back much further, to times when the glaciers still covered the land and their ancestors walked across ice bridges between islands. Archaeological evidence places Tlingit settlements throughout Southeast Alaska and the northern Pacific coast, from Yakutat Bay in the north to the Nass River in the south, encompassing over 500 islands and thousands of miles of coastline. The Tlingit are a maritime people, master navigators who carved enormous canoes from single cedar logs, vessels capable of carrying 50 people and traveling hundreds of miles across open ocean. These canoes weren't just transportation. They were technological marvels, designed with such precision that they could navigate both the open sea and the shallowest streams during salmon runs. Their relationship with salmon defined the rhythm of their year and shaped their worldview. 5 species of salmon return to Tlingit waters in massive runs that can last for months: Chinook, coho, sockeye, chum, and pink salmon. The Tlingit didn't just fish for salmon. They understood them as relatives, as beings who gave themselves willingly to sustain human life. In return, the Tlingit developed elaborate protocols to honor this sacrifice: ceremonies before the first catch, rituals to return salmon bones to the water so the fish could be reborn, and strict conservation practices to ensure the runs would continue for future generations. But salmon were just one part of a rich subsistence economy. The Tlingit harvested halibut and cod from deep waters, collected herring eggs by the ton during spring spawning, hunted seals and sea lions, trapped river otters for their luxurious fur, picked berries in alpine meadows each summer, and gathered medicinal plants according to seasonal cycles passed down through countless generations. The forest provided equally abundant resources. Cedar bark was stripped in long sheets and woven into clothing, baskets, and mats. Cedar roots, dug with painstaking care, became the thread that bound planks in their massive houses, and the weaving material for some of the finest baskets ever made. Spruce roots were harvested for their strength and flexibility. Devil's Club, that spiny plant that grows in damp ravines, was prized as medicine. Salmonberries, blueberries, and soapberries were harvested and preserved for winter feasts. This was not a subsistence economy of mere survival. The Tlingit coast was so abundant that anthropologists classify Tlingit society as one of the few hunter-gatherer cultures that developed complex social hierarchies, monumental architecture, slavery, and hereditary nobility, characteristics usually associated only with agricultural civilizations. But here's what I find most powerful about Tlingit society. The abundance of their environment didn't lead to chaos or competition. Instead, it gave rise to one of the most carefully structured social systems ever developed. At the highest level, all Tlingit people belong to one of two moieties, raven or eagle. In some northern groups, the eagle moiety is called wolf, but the principle remains the same. This division is absolute, inherited through the maternal line, and governs the most fundamental aspects of Tlingit life. You are born into your mother's moiety. You must marry someone from the opposite moiety. Your children belong to your wife's moiety, not yours. Your property and titles pass not to your own children, but to your sister's children. Your nephews inherit your position. Your nieces inherit your legacy. This system, called matrilineal descent, means that your primary family identity comes through your mother's line. Your father, though loved and respected, is technically from the opposite house. He is, in the formal structure of Tlingit society, a kind of honored outsider within his own household. Within each moiety exist multiple clans. The Tlingit call them na, groups claiming descent from common ancestors. Each clan possesses specific territories, fishing sites, berry patches, and hunting grounds. Each clan owns particular stories, songs, dances, and artistic designs that cannot be used by others without permission. Each clan maintains its own totem poles, its own regalia, its own history carved in cedar and woven into blankets, and preserved in oral traditions passed down through generations. And here's where it gets even more complex. Beneath the clan level exist individual houses, literally and figuratively. A clan house is both a physical structure and a social unit. These weren't simple dwellings. A traditional Tlingit clan house could measure 50 feet wide and 100 feet long, built from massive cedar planks so precisely fitted they required no nails or mortar. Inside, platforms ran along the walls, creating living spaces for multiple families. A central fire pit provided heat and light. Carved house posts, essentially interior totem poles, supported the roof beams, each one telling stories of the clan's history and prerogatives. The front of the house featured an elaborately carved entrance, sometimes through an opening in a large totem pole itself, so that entering the house meant symbolically entering through the mouth or body of a clan ancestor or crest animal. This wasn't just artistic flourish. It was a constant reminder that you were stepping into a living history, a space where the ancestors remained present and watchful. To understand why the moiety system matters so deeply, you must understand the Tlingit spiritual worldview. The Tlingit don't see a sharp division between the physical and spiritual realms. Instead, they perceive a world where everything possesses yatachi, a life force or spirit. Trees have spirits. Rivers have spirits. Mountains have spirits. Animals have spirits. Even carved objects, when made with proper protocol and intention, can become animated by spirits. But more than this, the Tlingit understand the world as fundamentally relational. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is connected through complex webs of kinship, reciprocity, and obligation. Even animals aren't separate from humans. They're understood as different peoples with their own societies, languages, and customs. When a Tlingit hunter took a bear, he didn't see himself as superior to the animal. He recognized the bear as a being who chose to give its life, and this created an obligation to use every part of the body, to perform the proper rituals, to show respect that maintained the relationship between bear people and human people. The word ha-ani means our land, but carries implications far deeper than ownership. It means the land that holds our history, the land where our ancestors are buried, the land that feeds us, the land we are responsible for maintaining, the land that is part of our identity, inseparable from who we are. This is the foundation. This understanding that everything is connected, that relationships must be maintained, that balance must be preserved. And it's precisely this worldview that gave rise to the moiety system, that dual structure dividing all Tlingit people into two great houses, forever intertwined, forever balancing each other, forever necessary to each other's existence. Now we're ready to hear the story of how this system came to be. In the beginning, according to Tlingit tradition, there was only darkness. Not the darkness of night as we know it, but an absolute darkness, a void where nothing existed except the possibility of existence. In this primordial darkness lived the spirits of what would become the world, waiting in a state between being and non-being, between form and formlessness. And in this darkness lived Raven. But I need to pause here, because understanding Raven is essential to everything that follows. And Raven is perhaps the most misunderstood figure in Pacific Northwest mythology. Raven is not good or evil in the way these concepts exist in Western thought. Raven is not a hero in the traditional sense, nor a villain. Raven is a trickster, but even that word doesn't quite capture the complexity of this being. Raven is simultaneously creator and destroyer, sacred and profane, wise and foolish, generous and greedy. Raven brought light to the world, but only because he wanted to eat more easily. Raven gave humans fire, but only after stealing it through an elaborate trick. Raven shaped the landscape and created many of the features we see today, but often by accident while pursuing his own appetites. The Tlingit call him Yale, a name that carries connotations of transformation, intelligence, and an amorality that exists beyond human judgment. To understand Yale is to understand that the universe doesn't operate according to simple moral dichotomies. Life is more complex, more paradoxical, more surprising than any neat system of ethics can capture. The most important Raven story, the one that explains the very existence of our world, tells how Raven brought light to the world. In the time of darkness, an old man lived in a house at the head of a river. This wasn't a human man, but a powerful spirit being. He kept all the light in the world locked in 3 wooden boxes, one containing the stars, one containing the moon, and one containing the sun. He hoarded this light jealously, keeping the world in perpetual darkness while he alone enjoyed illumination. But the old man had a daughter, and here's where Raven's cleverness enters the story. Raven discovered that the daughter would come to a particular stream to drink water each day. So Raven transformed himself, reduced his entire being to something impossibly small, and changed into a spruce needle floating on the stream's surface. When the daughter drank, she swallowed the needle, and Raven took residence inside her womb, transforming again into a child. Picture this moment. Raven, the ancient spirit of transformation, making himself vulnerable, reducing himself to embryonic form, submitting to months of development in the womb, all for his purpose of stealing the light. The daughter gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and the old man doted on his grandson. The child seemed perfect in every way, except he was unusually demanding and cried constantly until he got what he wanted. And what he wanted, day after day, were those 3 boxes in the corner of the house. The grandfather resisted at first, but the child's crying was relentless. Finally, the old man gave in and allowed the child to play with the box containing the stars. Immediately, the child transformed back into Raven, seized the box, and flew up through the smoke hole of the house. He threw open the box, releasing the stars into the sky, where they scattered across the darkness like seeds, creating the first patterns humans would use for navigation and storytelling. But Raven wasn't satisfied. He transformed himself once more into a needle, was swallowed again, was born again, and again cried until the grandfather relented and gave him the box containing the moon. Once more, Raven revealed his true form, flew through the smoke hole, and released the moon into the sky, creating the first measurement of time, the first cycles that would govern fishing seasons and ceremonial calendars. And then, one final time, Raven repeated this elaborate trick for the greatest prize, the box containing the sun itself. This time, when Raven flew through the smoke hole and burst open the box, the sun exploded into the sky with such brilliant light that the entire world was illuminated for the first time. The darkness fled. Mountains revealed themselves. Forests became visible. The ocean glittered. Creatures who had lived their entire existence in darkness blinked in astonishment at the colors suddenly surrounding them. But the light also transformed Raven himself. His feathers, originally white or multicolored, were scorched black by the sun's intensity. This is why ravens are black today, marked forever by the moment they brought light to the world. Now, here's what most people don't realize about this story. It's not just about how light came to the world. It's about the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Tlingit understood that light means nothing without darkness. Day means nothing without night. Visibility means nothing without the mystery of what remains hidden. Raven brought light, but darkness didn't disappear. It became the necessary opposite that makes light meaningful. This is the principle behind the moiety system. Raven and eagle don't represent good and evil, or even competing forces trying to dominate each other. They represent the two halves of a complete whole, like day and night, summer and winter, land and sea. Neither can exist without the other. Both are necessary. The tension between them creates the dynamic balance that sustains life. But what about eagle? If Raven is the trickster who brought light and transformation, what does eagle represent? In Tlingit cosmology, eagle, called chak, embodies different qualities. Where Raven is clever, eagle is powerful. Where Raven is transformative, eagle is constant. Where Raven bends rules, eagle upholds them. Where Raven brings change, eagle maintains tradition. Eagle soars at great heights, seeing everything from above with perfect clarity. Eagle's vision is legendary. Able to spot a salmon in the water from hundreds of feet in the air, able to perceive details invisible to other creatures. This represents wisdom, foresight, and the ability to see the larger patterns that govern existence. The eagle moiety is associated with the sky, with solar power, with the masculine principle, though remember, descent is through the maternal line, so these associations are symbolic rather than gendered in practice. Eagle represents law, order, and the stable structures that allow society to function. But here's the profound insight. Eagle cannot exist alone. Without Raven's tricks and transformations, Eagle's order becomes rigid and lifeless. Without Eagle's law and structure, Raven's chaos becomes destructive and unsustainable. Each moiety needs the other, not just for reproduction, which is ensured by the marriage rules, but for cosmic balance. This brings us to the heart of the moiety system, the law that you must marry someone from the opposite house. This isn't just a social rule to prevent incest, though it functions that way. It's a cosmological imperative. The Tlingit understood that creation emerges from the union of opposites. Day and night create the rhythm of existence. Summer and winter create the seasons. Land and sea create the coastal ecosystem that sustains life. Male and female create children. And Raven and Eagle, through their perpetual intermarriage, create Tlingit society itself. Every Tlingit marriage is a reenactment of this fundamental cosmic principle. When a raven man marries an eagle woman, or an eagle man marries a raven woman, they're not just joining two individuals or two families. They're participating in the creative tension that sustains the universe. And here's where the matrilineal inheritance becomes crucial. Because children belong to their mother's moiety, not their father's, every generation recreates the balance. The children of a raven mother and eagle father are ravens, but they are ravens who carry eagle blood and eagle influence through their father. This constant mixing and balancing prevents either moiety from becoming isolated or pure. It ensures that every Tlingit person embodies both principles, even while formally belonging to one house. Within each moiety, multiple clans trace their origins to specific ancestors, often through encounters with supernatural beings or animals who revealed themselves and bestowed crests, stories, and territories. The Raven moiety includes clans such as the Frog clan, who trace their origin to a woman who married a frog, or the Coho clan, who descend from an ancestor transformed by salmon people. Each Raven clan has its own creation story, but all share certain characteristics: adaptability, transformation, and a connection to the forces of change. The Eagle moiety includes clans such as the Killer Whale clan, who descend from an ancestor who lived among the Orcas, or the Wolf clan in northern regions, who trace their lineage to encounters with wolf spirits. Eagle clans tend to emphasize strength, vigilance, and protection of tradition. But here's what I find most powerful about this system. It's both absolutely rigid and infinitely flexible. The division between Raven and Eagle is inviolable. You can never change moieties, never escape this fundamental identity. Yet within each moiety exists tremendous diversity. Raven clans can have very different characters, territories, and traditions. Eagle clans vary widely in their specific practices and histories. This combination of fixed structure and internal variety creates stability without stagnation. The moiety system provides an unchanging framework, but within that framework, adaptation and innovation remain possible. Let's pause here and consider what the Tlingit understood about human nature and social organization. In our modern world, we're taught to think of ourselves as autonomous individuals, free agents making independent choices. We celebrate independence and self-sufficiency. We measure success by individual achievement. We aspire to need no one. The Tlingit saw this differently. They understood that identity is fundamentally relational. You are who you are because of your connections to others. You belong to a moiety. You belong to a clan. You belong to a house. These aren't limitations on your freedom. They're the very structures that make your existence meaningful. More than this, they understood that balance requires built-in opposition. You can't maintain equilibrium by having everyone agree, everyone think the same way, everyone pursue the same goals. You need different perspectives, different approaches, different principles in constant creative tension. The moiety system institutionalized this wisdom. It ensured that every family, every household, every generation contained both Raven and Eagle qualities, both change and stability, both innovation and tradition, both the clever adaptability needed to survive and the strong structures needed to maintain cultural continuity. What would our modern societies look like if we understood ourselves this way? Not as isolated individuals competing for resources, but as members of complementary groups whose differences aren't problems to solve but necessary conditions for collective thriving. This is the first mystery unveiled. The Raven and Eagle moieties aren't arbitrary divisions. They're a social technology designed to maintain cosmic balance, generation after generation, by ensuring that opposite principles remain forever intertwined. Now let's see how this system manifests in the most spectacular ceremonial practice ever developed by a Pacific Northwest culture, the potlatch. Imagine you receive an invitation, delivered by a formal messenger in ceremonial regalia. A great house is hosting a potlatch, a feast and ceremony that may last for days, even weeks. As an invited guest, you're obligated to attend. This isn't a casual party you can decline. It's a legally binding summons to witness and participate in an event that will reshape the social landscape. You arrive at the clan house to find it transformed. The interior, normally dimly lit and utilitarian, blazes with firelight. The walls are lined with carefully arranged gifts, blankets piled higher than a person's head, carved boxes filled with food, beautifully woven baskets. copper shields worth more than houses, bentwood boxes containing sacred regalia. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of items await distribution. The host clan, dressed in their finest ceremonial robes, their faces painted with clan designs, stand ready to greet guests from the opposite moiety. Because here's the essential rule of the potlatch: your own moiety doesn't receive the gifts. Everything goes to the opposite house. This is the potlatch, and it's about to reveal an economic philosophy so radical, so counterintuitive to modern capitalism, that the Canadian and American governments banned it for over 60 years, fearing it would prevent Indigenous peoples from becoming civilized. The word potlatch comes from Chinook jargon, a trade language of the Pacific Northwest. It derives from the Nucha-Nulth word patchatl, meaning to give. But in Tlingit, the ceremony is called ku-ix, a word that captures the complexity of this institution far better than the simple English translation give. Ku-ix means to give ceremonially, to redistribute wealth with witnesses, to validate claims, to honor obligations, to transform status, to heal grief, to maintain balance. It's simultaneously an economic transaction, a legal procedure, a religious ceremony, a theatrical performance, and a history lesson, all compressed into a single event. But here's what most people don't realize about the potlatch. It's not generosity in the way we usually understand that word. It's not charity. The host isn't giving gifts because they feel sorry for the recipients or want to help them. They're giving because they must, because giving is the only way to validate their social position, legitimize their claims, and maintain their honor. The potlatch is mandatory for specific occasions: when someone dies and their heir needs to formally assume their position, when a house is built and must be properly inaugurated, when a totem pole is raised and the stories it tells must be officially witnessed, when a child receives their name and must be introduced to society, when a wrong has been committed and must be formally addressed, when a wedding is celebrated and the union between moieties must be blessed. In each case, the host clan must invite witnesses from the opposite moiety, feed them lavishly, entertain them with songs and dances, and distribute gifts to every single person present. The quantity and quality of gifts distributed directly determines whether the claims being made are validated. If the gifts are insufficient, the event fails. The names aren't legitimate. The grievances aren't resolved. The totem pole has no authority. Everything remains in limbo until enough wealth has been properly distributed. Let me walk you through what actually happens during a major potlatch, because the ceremony follows a carefully structured sequence that reveals the deep meaning behind each element. Months, sometimes years before the event, planning begins. The hosting clan must accumulate massive quantities of wealth, not just material goods, but also songs, dances, and stories that will be performed. They prepare food in quantities hard to imagine: dozens of seals, hundreds of salmon, barrels of herring eggs, boxes of dried berries, vats of rendered eulachon oil, a fish oil so rich it could be used as food or burned as fuel. Formal invitations are delivered by messengers who arrive in full regalia, often in canoes, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles to reach important guests. These messengers recite the invitation in highly formalized language, specifying the date, the purpose, and the expected attendance. To refuse such an invitation without grave cause is to insult the host clan and risk creating a conflict that could last generations. On the appointed day, guests arrive according to their rank and status. The highest-ranking chiefs and clan leaders arrive last, after lesser members of their moiety have been seated. Each arrival is announced with songs specific to that person's clan and lineage. The guests are literally sung into the house, their ancestors' deeds and crests proclaimed in complex vocal compositions that serve as both greeting and genealogical verification. The seating arrangement isn't casual. Every person sits in a location determined by their clan affiliation, their rank within that clan, and their relationship to the host. The highest-ranking opposite moiety chiefs sit in the most prestigious locations, closest to the fire, where they can be seen by everyone. This arrangement isn't just protocol. It's a visual map of the entire social structure, with every person's position relative to every other person carefully displayed. This is the crucial legal function of the potlatch. The host clan makes their formal declarations. We are raising this totem pole. We are passing this title from uncle to nephew. We are resolving this dispute. We are naming this child. They tell the stories that justify their claims, recounting the history of their lineage, describing how they acquired certain rights and territories, explaining the relationships that give them authority to make these declarations. The guests from the opposite moiety serve as official witnesses. Their presence makes the event legitimate. In Tlingit legal tradition, claims without witnesses are meaningless. You cannot simply declare something and have it be true. It must be witnessed by members of the opposite moiety, and those witnesses must accept gifts in acknowledgement of their role. This is why the potlatch can never be a private affair. The entire community must know what has transpired. The witnessing must be public and undeniable. Picture this: enormous carved wooden dishes, some so large they require multiple people to carry them, filled with food prepared according to traditional methods perfected over centuries. Salmon dried and smoked to preserve it through winter. Seal meat roasted over open fires. Herring eggs, that delicacy harvested by placing hemlock branches in spawning waters and collecting the eggs that stick to the needles. Berries mixed with eulachon oil to create a dish called Indian ice cream. Dried seaweed, clams, halibut. Everything the land and sea provide, transformed through culinary expertise into a feast that demonstrates the host clan's wealth and generosity. But this isn't just a meal. The food itself carries meaning. By feeding the opposite moiety, the host clan demonstrates their ability to provide, their connection to rich territories, their skill as hunters and gatherers, their relationship with the supernatural beings who control animal populations. Abundance proves spiritual favor. Between courses of the feast, the host clan performs. This is where the artistic genius of Tlingit culture becomes visible. Dancers emerge wearing carved masks, some with movable parts that transform one creature into another before the audience's eyes. They wear ceremonial robes decorated with clan crests, created with thousands of hours of labor. Mountain goat wool woven into blankets decorated with designs outlined in abalone shell. Headdresses featuring clan emblems rise above the dancers. Rattles shake. Drums beat. Voices rise in songs that have been passed down through countless generations, each song tied to specific events in clan history. But these aren't performances meant simply to entertain. They're reenactments of the supernatural encounters that gave the clan its crests and prerogatives. They're visual history lessons, compressed myths, living traditions. Each dance tells a story: how an ancestor met a bear spirit and received the right to use bear as a crest, how a woman married into the sea and her children became the killer whale clan, how ravens stole the light, how eagle hunted the first salmon. The opposite moiety watches carefully because they're not just witnessing entertainment, they're verifying legal claims. If a clan performs a dance they don't have the right to perform, using a crest they haven't legitimately acquired, the witnesses can object. The entire event can fail. So every movement, every song, every displayed crest is simultaneously art and evidence. And now we come to the heart of the potlatch, the moment when wealth changes hands in quantities that seem, to outside observers, absolutely crazy. The host clan's speakers begin calling names, starting with the highest-ranking chiefs from the opposite moiety. As each name is called, gifts are brought forward. Not one or two items, but stacks of them. A high-ranking chief might receive dozens of blankets, carved boxes filled with valuable goods, copper shields, which functioned as a form of currency, each one with a known value, ceremonial regalia, even slaves in the pre-contact era. But here's what I find most powerful about this moment. The host clan isn't trying to make the guests happy or buy their friendship. They're paying the witnesses for their legal services. The gifts are compensation for the time and attention the opposite moiety has given to witness and validate the claims being made. The more significant the claim, the more valuable the gifts must be. Moreover, the distribution creates obligations that flow in the opposite direction. By accepting these gifts, the witnesses are bound to support the claims they've witnessed. If someone challenges the new chief's legitimacy, these witnesses must defend him. If someone disputes the totem pole's stories, these witnesses must verify them. The gifts are both payment and contract, compensation and obligation. And here's where the economics become truly fascinating. Every gift must eventually be reciprocated. When the receiving clan hosts their own potlatch, they must give back more than they received. Not the same amount, more. This creates a kind of interest-bearing debt. But instead of money accumulating for individuals, prestige accumulates for clans. Let's pause here and really examine what's happening economically, because the potlatch represents a complete inversion of capitalist principles. In our modern economy, wealth is measured by accumulation. The richest person is the one who has the most, the biggest bank account, the most properties, the largest investment portfolio. We admire billionaires who've accumulated more wealth than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. Accumulation equals success. In the potlatch economy, wealth is measured by distribution. The richest person is the one who has given away the most. The most powerful chief isn't the one sitting on piles of goods, but the one whose potlatches are remembered for generations because of the sheer quantity of wealth that flowed through their hands to others. But here's what most people don't realize about this system. It's not naive idealism or primitive generosity. It's a sophisticated economic strategy, perfectly adapted to the Tlingit environment and social structure. Consider the practical effects. First, the potlatch prevents wealth concentration. In any society, some people will be more successful at acquiring resources than others. Some clan territories are richer in salmon runs. Some leaders are more skilled at trading. Some families have more members who can work. Without redistribution mechanisms, these advantages compound over generations, creating extreme inequality. The potlatch forces successful clans to redistribute their surplus, preventing the kind of wealth concentration that tears societies apart. Second, it creates a safety net. When your clan falls on hard times, a poor salmon run, a house destroyed by fire, a chief who dies young, you need help. In a potlatch economy, you've accumulated social credit through the gifts you've given. Now you can call in those obligations. The clans you've gifted must host you, must feed you, must give to you. It's not charity, it's reciprocation of debts you're owed. Third, it incentivizes productivity. If wealth just sits in storage, there's a limit to how much anyone bothers to accumulate. But if wealth can be transformed into prestige through distribution, suddenly there's motivation to produce more. More blankets to weave means more status to gain. More salmon to catch means bigger potlatches to host. The economy stays active because giving creates more status than hoarding. Fourth, it strengthens social bonds. Every gift creates a relationship. Every potlatch weaves tighter the connections between clans and moieties. The opposite moiety members who receive gifts at your potlatch become invested in your success, because your success enables future potlatches where they'll benefit. The entire society becomes interconnected through networks of reciprocal obligation. Fifth, it resolves conflicts without warfare. When disputes arise between clans, they can be settled through competitive potlatching. Instead of fighting, clans compete to give away more. The clan that can distribute the most wealth wins the dispute, not through violence, but through demonstration of their prosperity and support network. This is warfare transformed into ceremonial generosity. To understand the full sophistication of the potlatch economy, we need to talk about copper shields, tina, in Tlingit. These were large, shield-shaped pieces of copper, often 3 feet tall, hammered and decorated with clan crests. But they weren't just decorative items. They functioned as a form of currency, each shield with a known value that could be expressed in terms of blankets, slaves, or canoes. But here's what makes copper shields fascinating. Their value wasn't fixed. It increased each time they were potlatched. A copper shield given away at one potlatch would be worth more when given away at the next. Some famous copper shields had histories spanning generations, their value accumulating until they were worth more than entire villages. Copper shields were also used in one of the most dramatic potlatch practices, the copper-breaking ceremony. When a chief wanted to demonstrate ultimate power and wealth, he would publicly destroy a valuable copper shield, breaking it into pieces or throwing it into the sea. This wasn't senseless destruction, it was a statement. I am so wealthy that I can destroy wealth itself and still have more than you. Sometimes rival chiefs would compete by destroying copper shields, each trying to destroy more wealth than the other. To modern economists, this looks like pure waste. But in the potlatch system, it made perfect sense. The chief who could destroy the most wealth proved he could access the most wealth, which proved his clan's territories were the most productive, which proved his leadership was favored by the spirits, which validated his claims to status and authority. In 1884, the Canadian government banned the potlatch. The United States followed with similar restrictions. The official justification was that the potlatch prevented Indigenous peoples from becoming civilized and economically productive. How could Indians become good capitalist workers if they kept giving away everything they accumulated? But here's what I find most powerful about what happened next. The Tlingit and other Northwest Coast peoples continued potlatching in secret. They risked arrest, property confiscation, even imprisonment to maintain this practice. Because the potlatch wasn't just an economic system or a party. It was the mechanism through which their entire society functioned. Without potlatches, names couldn't be passed down. Chiefs couldn't be legitimized. Disputes couldn't be resolved. Marriages couldn't be properly celebrated. Grief couldn't be formally acknowledged. The social fabric itself would unravel. Some clans modified the practice, calling potlatches Christmas parties or Thanksgiving dinners to avoid legal consequences. Others moved their ceremonies to remote locations, far from government agents. Sacred regalia was hidden in buried boxes, protected through decades of prohibition. The ban lasted until 1951 in Canada and was never formally lifted in Alaska, though enforcement gradually ceased. When potlatching could resume openly, many communities had lost elders who knew the full protocols. Songs had been forgotten, dances had been lost, sacred objects had been confiscated and sold to museums, but the practice survived. And today, potlatches continue throughout Tlingit territory, adapting to modern circumstances while maintaining their essential function. Money might substitute for blankets. Printed programs might explain protocols to younger generations unfamiliar with traditions. But the fundamental principle remains. Wealth must flow, obligations must be acknowledged, witnesses must be compensated, and giving away proves your worth more than keeping. Contemporary Tlingit potlatches blend traditional practices with modern realities. A family saving for years to host a memorial potlatch for a deceased elder might give away cash along with traditional gifts. They might serve store-bought food alongside traditionally prepared salmon. They might play recordings of songs when no one present knows how to sing them correctly anymore. Some see this as dilution of tradition, but others recognize it as the same adaptability that has allowed Tlingit culture to survive for thousands of years. The core principle remains intact. When something significant happens, you gather your opposite moiety, you feed them, you give to them, and through their witness and acceptance of gifts, you legitimize your claims and maintain your place in the social order. The potlatch today serves additional functions beyond its traditional roles. It's become an act of cultural resistance, a statement that Tlingit society operates by its own laws and values, not those imposed by colonial governments. It's become a teaching mechanism where elders explain protocols to younger generations, ensuring cultural knowledge continues. It's become a healing practice, helping communities process collective traumas while reaffirming cultural identity. Let's sit with this for a moment. Because the potlatch challenges some of our deepest assumptions about human nature and economic behavior. We're taught that people are fundamentally selfish, that we're motivated primarily by self-interest, that economic systems must work with human greed rather than against it. The entire structure of capitalism rests on these assumptions. We accumulate because we're told that security comes from having more than we need, from building walls of wealth between ourselves and potential hardship. The Tlingit saw this differently. They understood that true security comes not from what you hoard, but from the network of obligations you've created through giving. When you need help, your accumulated possessions won't save you, but the people you've gifted, who now owe you reciprocation, will. They understood that status based on accumulation creates resentment and division. The person with the most becomes a target for theft, envy, and violence. But status based on distribution creates gratitude and alliance. The person who is given the most becomes someone everyone wants to succeed, because their success means future gifts for everyone. They understood that wealth sitting in storage is dead wealth. Only wealth in motion creates prosperity. A blanket folded in a box helps no one. But a blanket given away at a potlatch keeps someone warm, creates an obligation that strengthens social bonds, and validates claims that maintain social order. The same blanket, through giving, accomplishes far more than it ever could through keeping. What would our world look like if we measured success by contribution rather than accumulation? If we celebrated billionaires not for what they have, but for what they've given away? If we structured our economy to ensure that wealth constantly circulates rather than concentrating in fewer and fewer hands? The potlatch isn't a relic of a simpler time. It's a sophisticated solution to problems we still face: inequality, social fragmentation, the confusion of wealth with worth, the epidemic of loneliness that comes from treating ourselves as isolated individuals rather than as members of interconnected communities. The Tlingit built an economy on a radical idea: that the purpose of wealth is to strengthen relationships, not to insulate yourself from needing relationships. That the richest person is the one who is given the most, not the one who is kept the most. This is the second mystery unveiled. The potlatch isn't primitive generosity. It's a revolutionary economic system that sustained complex societies for thousands of years by ensuring wealth flowed rather than accumulated, by transforming material goods into social bonds, by making giving more profitable than keeping. Now let's turn to how this system of reciprocity, status, and storytelling manifests in physical form, through the sacred art of totem pole carving. Stand before a totem pole and you're looking at something far more complex than a wooden sculpture. You're looking at a three-dimensional book, a legal document, a family tree, a prayer, a land claim, a history, a spiritual statement, all compressed into a single carved cedar trunk, every figure intentionally placed, every detail carrying meaning that can be read by those who know the language. But here's what most people don't realize about totem poles. They're not ancient in the way we usually think of indigenous traditions. The massive totem poles that now define Pacific Northwest visual culture exploded in size and complexity during the 1800s, after the introduction of metal tools made carving easier, and after the intensification of the potlatch economy created demand for more elaborate displays of wealth and status. Does this make them less authentic? Absolutely not. It reveals something crucial about Tlingit culture. It's not a static museum piece, frozen in some imagined pristine past. It's a living tradition that adapts, innovates, and responds to changing circumstances while maintaining essential principles. Let's enter the world of totem pole carving and discover the techniques, meanings, and spiritual practices that transform a tree into a story. The process begins in the forest, with prayer and proper protocol. The carver seeking a tree for a major pole doesn't just walk into the woods and start cutting. He enters into relationship with the forest itself, with the cedar trees, with the spirits that inhabit these ancient beings. Western red cedar is the preferred wood, Xat in Tlingit. These trees can live over 1,000 years, growing to heights of 200 feet, with trunks measuring 40 feet in circumference. But size isn't the only consideration. The carver looks for a tree with straight grain, minimal branching on the lower trunk, and wood free from rot. The tree must be mature but not too old, large but not decaying, strong enough to stand for generations yet workable enough to carve. Once a suitable tree is identified, ceremony begins. The carver speaks to the tree, explaining the purpose for which it's being taken, asking permission, offering prayers. This isn't superstition or romantic idealism. It reflects the Tlingit understanding that trees possess spirits, that taking a life, even tree life, creates an obligation, that harvesting resources requires acknowledgement and respect. Traditional harvesting involved careful planning. The tree would be felled using controlled burning and stone tools in the pre-contact era, later with axes and saws. The trunk would be stripped of bark, the branches removed, and the log transported, often a monumental task requiring dozens of people and specially designed log skids greased with fish oil to help the massive timber slide down to water where it could be floated to the village. Picture this: a massive cedar log, perhaps 30 feet long and 6 feet in diameter, lying horizontally outside the clan house. The master carver, the kawu, approaches with his tools. In the traditional era, these were stone adzes with blades of jade or basalt, chisels made from bone or antler, and shark skin for sanding. After European contact, metal tools revolutionized the craft: steel axes, curved knives called carving knives, and gouges of various sizes. But tools are just tools. The real art lies in understanding cedar itself, how it splits along grain lines, how it responds to different cutting techniques, how moisture content affects workability, how the wood will age and weather over time. The carver begins with the basic forms, roughing out the major figures that will stack vertically on the pole. Each figure must flow into the next, creating visual continuity. This isn't easy because totem figures aren't carved with naturalistic proportions. They follow specific artistic conventions developed over centuries. Human figures typically have oval faces, clearly defined eyebrows, and hands placed across the chest or holding objects. But what makes a figure identifiable as a specific being isn't human-like realism. It's the presence of specific crest elements. A figure might have a killer whale's dorsal fin emerging from its back, or a beaver's prominent teeth, or a raven's beak, or a frog's wide mouth. These identifying features, called at-u, crests, or owned things, are what make the figure meaningful. Animal figures follow specific conventions. Beavers always have prominent front teeth and are often shown holding sticks or branches. Bears have large paws with visible claws, prominent nostrils, and sometimes a protruding tongue. Eagles have curved beaks and are often shown with wings spread. Killer whales have distinctive dorsal fins and ovoid-shaped pectoral fins. Ravens have straight beaks, unlike eagles' curved ones. Frogs have wide mouths and no visible teeth. But here's what I find most powerful about totem pole carving. These aren't arbitrary artistic choices. Each convention developed through generations of carvers refining the visual language, figuring out how to make stories legible in wood, creating a grammar of forms that could be read by anyone familiar with the culture. To understand a totem pole, you must learn to read Tlingit formline design, the distinctive artistic style of the northern Pacific Northwest. Formline is characterized by flowing, curvilinear forms that fill space with extraordinary efficiency. The primary design element is a bold black line, traditionally painted with charcoal mixed with salmon egg binder, that defines the major shapes. These primary form lines are typically about 1/4 inch wide and flow smoothly without abrupt changes in direction. Within the primary form lines, secondary form lines, traditionally red, made from ochre or iron oxide, fill space and provide detail. Tertiary elements, the actual background, might be left unpainted or colored in green, blue, or other colors depending on the region and period. The forms themselves follow specific patterns. The ovoid, An egg-shaped form with precise proportions and a slight point at one corner appears everywhere. It represents eyes, joints, ears, feathers, and countless other elements. A properly drawn ovoid has a specific ratio of width to height, a precisely placed corner point, and a slightly flattened bottom. Masters carvers could draw perfect ovoids freehand, a skill that took years to develop. U-forms, shapes that look like squared-off letter U's, fill corners and create smooth transitions between elements. S-forms and split U-forms add complexity and movement to the design. Together, these elements create the distinctive look of Northwest Coast art, where every space is filled with meaning, where positive and negative space balance perfectly, where the eye moves smoothly across the surface, finding new details with each viewing. But totem poles aren't covered with elaborate two-dimensional formline designs. They're three-dimensional sculptures where the formline principles govern the underlying proportions and relationships, but the primary visual impact comes from the carved forms themselves and their arrangement. So how do you actually read a totem pole? Let's walk through a hypothetical memorial pole for a deceased Raven clan chief. At the base, you might see a figure of a man with a specific copper shield design across his chest. This represents the deceased chief himself, carved in a way that incorporates his personal crests and achievements. Above him might be a bear figure, indicating that bear is one of his clan's crests, acquired generations ago when an ancestor encountered a bear spirit and received the right to use it as a family emblem. Above the bear, a woman holding a frog. This tells the story of the Frog Princess, a legendary ancestor who married a frog and whose children became the Frog Clan, a subgroup within the Raven moiety. This figure establishes the specific lineage within the larger moiety structure. Higher still, a raven figure with a box in its claws. This references the story we heard earlier. Ravens stealing the sun, moon, and stars from the old man's house. This isn't just decorative. It's a statement of moiety affiliation and a claim to the fundamental creation story of the Tlingit people. At the very top, sometimes an eagle or a figure from the opposite moiety. This acknowledges the relationship between the moieties, the fact that this pole is being raised through a potlatch where eagle moiety members serve as witnesses. But the reading goes deeper than just identifying the figures. The pole's location matters, where it stands relative to the clan house, how it orients toward water or mountains, which other poles surround it. The timing of its raising matters, what events precipitated its creation, which witnesses attended its dedication, what gifts were distributed. The pole's very existence is embedded in a web of social relationships, historical events, and spiritual significance that extends far beyond the carved wood itself. Here's what most people don't realize about totem pole carving. It's not just artistic expression or skilled woodworking. It's a spiritual practice, a way of maintaining relationship with ancestors, with spirits, with the cedar tree's sacrifice, and with the stories that define clan identity. Master carvers often fasted before beginning work on major poles, entering an altered state of consciousness that opened them to spiritual guidance. They sang specific songs while carving, songs that had been passed down through generations of carvers, songs that carried power and proper protocol. They made offerings to the spirits of the tools, the cedar, and the beings being depicted. The apprenticeship to become a master carver traditionally took decades. You didn't just learn techniques, you learned stories, protocols, spiritual practices, and the heavy responsibility of working with clan property. A carver who made mistakes could dishonor a clan, could represent crests incorrectly, could tell stories the clan didn't have rights to. The consequences weren't just embarrassment. They could trigger conflicts between clans, challenges to legitimacy, and social ruptures. This is why carving knowledge was closely guarded, passed down through specific family lines, protected as valuable property in itself. You couldn't just decide to become a totem carver. You had to be born into the right family, demonstrate aptitude, undergo years of training, prove your reliability, and earn the trust of the clan leaders who would commission your work. The actual raising of a finished totem pole was a spectacular event, the climax of a major potlatch. The pole, which might weigh several tons, had to be lifted from horizontal to vertical position and set into a hole dug specifically to receive it. This required careful engineering, strong ropes, dozens of people pulling in coordinated timing, and often a complex system of levers and supports. As the pole rose, singers chanted, drummers beat a steady rhythm, and the entire community watched. This was the moment when all the work, the years of accumulating wealth for the potlatch, the months of carving, the weeks of ceremony, culminated in the permanent installation of a new monument that would stand for generations. If the pole fell during raising, it was considered a bad omen, a sign that the spirits didn't approve or that some protocol had been violated. If it rose smoothly and settled perfectly vertical in its hole, it confirmed that everything had been done properly, that the deceased was properly honored, that the claims being made were legitimate. Once vertical, the pole was never left plain. Artists painted it with traditional colors: black, red, green, blue-green, and sometimes white. These weren't arbitrary decorative choices. Each color had meaning and came from specific natural sources: black from charcoal or lignite coal, red from ochre or cinnabar, green from copper oxidation, blue-green from celadonite. The colors helped define forms, added symbolic meaning, and protected the wood from weathering. Now here's something that shocks most people. Traditional Tlingit culture didn't preserve totem poles indefinitely. When a pole deteriorated from weather exposure, it was allowed to fall and rot back into the earth. This wasn't neglect, it was proper protocol. The pole had served its purpose. It had been raised at a potlatch, witnessed by the opposite moiety, stood as testament to clan history and rights for its natural lifespan. When it fell, it returned to the earth, completing the cycle. The stories it told weren't lost because they lived in oral tradition, in the memories of those who had witnessed its raising, in newer poles that reference the same history. This practice horrified museum collectors and anthropologists in the late 1800s and early 1900s, who saw magnificent carvings rotting in abandoned villages and felt compelled to save them by removing them to museums. What they didn't understand was that they were disrupting a sacred cycle, treating these spiritual objects as mere art, separating them from the social context that gave them meaning. Many of these poles now stand in museums worldwide. The American Museum of Natural History in New York, the British Museum in London, countless regional museums throughout North America. For decades, Tlingit communities have sought their return, arguing that these aren't museum specimens but sacred objects that belong with their clans. Some have been returned. Some remain in museums, creating ongoing tensions between preservation interests and indigenous rights. But increasingly, museums are working with Tlingit communities to ensure proper protocols are followed, to allow ceremonial access, and sometimes to repatriate poles to their home communities. Today, totem pole carving experiences a renaissance. After decades when the art nearly died out during the potlatch prohibition and the disruptions of forced assimilation, new generations of carvers are learning from elders who maintained the knowledge. Modern carvers work with traditional hand tools and power tools, blending old techniques with new efficiencies. They carve poles for potlatches, but also for public installations, museums, and cultural centers. Some poles commemorate historical events: the return of ancestral remains from museum collections, the survival of communities through epidemics and cultural suppression, the continuation of traditions against all odds. The stories told on contemporary poles sometimes address modern themes while following traditional conventions. A pole might include figures representing environmental destruction, cultural revival, or historical trauma, but carved using the same form-line principles and crest animals that have been used for centuries. What I find most powerful about contemporary totem carving is that it demonstrates the living nature of Tlingit culture. These aren't artists recreating historical practices as museum demonstrations. They're practitioners of a continuing tradition, adapting their art to speak to current conditions while maintaining essential principles and protocols. A totem pole raised today follows the same basic process as one raised 200 years ago. Commissioned by a clan for specific purposes, carved by a trained artist who knows the stories and protocols, raised at a potlatch where the opposite moiety serves as witnesses, and given meaning through the social context in which it exists. Consider what the Tlingit understand about the relationship between art, history, and community that we've largely forgotten. We treat art as individual expression, as the unique vision of a solitary artist creating for aesthetic or commercial purposes. We display art in galleries and museums, separated from daily life, treated as objects to observe rather than functional elements of social organization. The Tlingit saw art differently. A totem pole isn't one person's creative expression. It's the physical manifestation of clan history, rights, and identity, created through collaboration between the carver and the clan leaders who commission it, given meaning through the potlatch ceremony where it's raised, validated by witnesses from the opposite moiety, and embedded in a living social context where it serves legal, spiritual, and historical functions simultaneously. This art doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to maintain relationships between clans, between moieties, between the living and the dead, between humans and the spirits of animals and natural forces, between the present generation and those who will come after. When a totem pole rots and falls, the stories don't die because the art was never the primary repository of knowledge. The art was a physical reference point for oral traditions, a mnemonic device helping people remember complex genealogies and histories, a visible symbol of invisible relationships and obligations. What would our world look like if we understood art this way? Not as commodity or decoration, but as essential infrastructure for maintaining cultural memory and social bonds. Not as individual expression, but as collaborative meaning-making that serves community needs. The totem pole teaches us that the most powerful art isn't necessarily the most innovative or unique. Sometimes the most powerful art is that which most faithfully serves its community, which most clearly communicates shared values and history, which most effectively maintains the connections that hold society together. This is the third mystery unveiled. Totem poles aren't just sculptures. They're three-dimensional libraries, legal documents, prayers, and history books all combined, carved according to principles refined over centuries, raised through ceremonies that validate their authority, and given meaning through the living social relationships in which they're embedded. We've journeyed through three interconnected mysteries of Tlingit culture: the moiety system that divides all people into balanced halves, the potlatch economy that measures wealth by giving rather than keeping, and the totem pole tradition that transforms cedar trees into living history. But now we must ask the deeper question: what does this ancient wisdom offer to us today, living in a world that seems so different from the mist-shrouded coasts of Southeast Alaska? I believe the Tlingit have something urgent to teach us, and we ignore these lessons at our peril. The moiety system reveals a profound truth we've forgotten. Identity is relational. You are who you are because of your connections to others, not despite them. In our modern world, we celebrate independence to the point of isolation. We're encouraged to define ourselves as autonomous individuals, to build lives where we need no one, to measure success by how self-sufficient we've become. But this creates a kind of poverty deeper than material want, the poverty of disconnection. We have more ways to communicate than ever before, yet report record levels of loneliness. We live among millions of people yet feel isolated. We pursue individual success while communities fragment around us. The Tlingit structured their entire society to ensure that no one could exist in isolation, that every person was embedded in networks of obligation and relationship that extended across moieties, clans, and generations. Your opposite moiety needed you for marriage partners, for witnesses at potlatches, for balance in the social order. You needed them for the same reasons. This mutual dependency wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a strength to cultivate. What if we stopped trying to need no one and instead built lives rich in mutual obligation? Not the suffocating obligation of guilt or duty, but the life-giving obligation of reciprocal care, where your well-being depends on mine and mine depends on yours, where we're woven together in relationships that make isolation impossible. The Potlatch reveals an economic truth that challenges everything we're taught about wealth and worth. True prosperity comes from circulation, not accumulation. In our world of growing inequality, where a handful of individuals control more wealth than billions of people combined, where we're told that the solution to poverty is more economic growth that somehow, eventually, might trickle down, the Potlatch offers a radically different model. The Tlingit understood that wealth sitting in storage is dead weight. Only wealth in motion creates prosperity. Only giving builds the networks of reciprocal obligation that provide true security. The richest person isn't the one with the biggest bank account, but the one who has given the most, and therefore can call upon the most people when help is needed. Imagine an economy structured around this principle. Not socialism or communism in their historical forms, but something closer to the original meaning of economy. From the Greek oikonomia, meaning household management, the art of ensuring all members of the community have what they need. An economy that incentivizes contribution rather than accumulation, that rewards those who strengthen community rather than those who extract the most resources, that understands prosperity as collective well-being rather than individual wealth. This isn't a naive fantasy. It's how human societies successfully organize themselves for thousands of years, in countless cultures worldwide. The Potlatch is just one highly developed example. What we call economics, the current capitalist system based on infinite growth and individual accumulation, is actually the experiment, and a very recent one at that. We might want to check how it's working before dismissing alternatives as primitive. The totem pole tradition reveals a truth about culture and memory. The stories that matter most must be woven into the fabric of daily life, not preserved in museums or archives separate from living communities. In our world of digital storage, where we can record everything yet seem to remember less, where information multiplies while wisdom becomes scarce, the Tlingit demonstrate a different approach to preserving what matters. They didn't write their histories in books that could be stored on shelves and forgotten. They carved them in poles that stood in the center of communities, impossible to ignore. They encoded them in songs that had to be sung at ceremonies, in dances that had to be performed at potlatches, in stories that had to be told to children and grandchildren. Cultural knowledge lived in practice, not just in records. When a totem pole rotted and fell, it didn't mean the loss of history, because the history lived in the people who had witnessed its raising, who knew its stories, who would reference those stories when new poles were carved. The art was inseparable from the social practices that gave it meaning. What if we treated our most important cultural knowledge this way? Not as information to be recorded and stored, but as wisdom to be practiced and embodied. Not as content to be consumed, but as traditions to be maintained through active participation. But I must offer a warning as well. We cannot simply appropriate Tlingit practices and expect them to work in our contexts. The moiety system functions as part of a complete worldview and social structure. You can't just declare yourself a raven or an eagle and expect it to mean something without the thousands of years of stories, relationships, and protocols that give these identities substance. The Potlatch works because it's embedded in a specific social and economic context, where everyone shares basic assumptions about the purpose of wealth and the nature of obligation. Dropping potlatch practices into capitalist economies doesn't automatically create justice or community. Totem poles mean what they mean because of the living traditions that interpret them, the clan relationships they represent, the ceremonies that raise them. Buying a totem pole as decoration or attempting to carve one without proper authorization isn't honoring Tlingit culture. It's stealing from it. What we can do is learn from the principles while respecting the specific practices as belonging to Tlingit people. We can examine how these principles might be adapted to our own contexts in ways that honor their origins while serving our own community's needs. The Tlingit have survived 10,000 years in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They've survived epidemics that killed up to 90% of their population. They've survived cultural suppression, forced assimilation, the prohibition of their sacred ceremonies, the theft of their children sent to boarding schools, the extraction of their resources by colonial powers. They've survived it all while maintaining cultural practices, languages, and identities that remain vibrantly alive today. They've survived because they built their culture on principles that are fundamentally sound: balance between opposites, redistribution of resources, embedding of wisdom in practice, relationship as the foundation of identity. These aren't primitive ideas we've outgrown. They're sophisticated solutions to permanent human challenges that we ignore at our peril. As we face our own challenges, climate change, inequality, loneliness, the fragmentation of communities, the loss of shared meaning, the Tlingit offer not answers we can simply adopt, but questions we must seriously consider. What if identity comes from relationship rather than isolation? What if wealth means what you give rather than what you keep? What if art serves community rather than just expressing individuality? What if balance requires the institutionalization of opposition rather than the pursuit of agreement? What if security comes from networks of mutual obligation rather than walls of accumulated resources? These are ancient questions that point toward futures we might still choose if we're willing to learn from peoples we've dismissed as primitive, from traditions we've tried to erase, from wisdom we've almost lost. The raven and eagle still circle above Southeast Alaska, still call across the waters, still embody the dual principles that have sustained Tlingit culture for millennia. Their mystery isn't fully revealed in one telling or one lifetime. It unfolds gradually, layer by layer, like a totem pole being carved or a potlatch unfolding over days of ceremony. But perhaps we've caught a glimpse, enough to recognize that these ancient peoples have something to teach us, not as artifacts of the past, but as bearers of wisdom that grows more relevant as our own societies crack under the weight of individualism, inequality, and disconnection. The moiety system, the potlatch economy, the totem pole tradition, these aren't museum pieces to admire from a distance. They're living practices that continue to adapt and evolve, that continue to serve Tlingit communities, that continue to demonstrate that human societies can organize themselves around principles very different from those that currently dominate. And in that demonstration lies hope. If humans have built societies based on balance, redistribution, and relationship before, we can do it again. If the Tlingit have maintained these practices through centuries of pressure to abandon them, then perhaps our current economic and social systems aren't as inevitable as we're told they are. If ancient wisdom has survived this long, perhaps it's because it speaks to something permanent in human nature. Not our capacity for greed and competition, but our deeper need for connection, meaning, and belonging. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we honor what we've learned without appropriating what doesn't belong to us? First, we listen. The Tlingit people are still here, still practicing their traditions, still adapting ancient wisdom to modern challenges. When they speak about environmental protection, about the importance of cultural preservation, about the violence of having their children taken or their sacred objects locked in museums, we must listen as students, not judges. Second, we examine our own societies with fresh eyes. What structures maintain balance in our communities, or fail to? What mechanisms redistribute wealth, or prevent redistribution? How do we preserve our histories and values, or fail to preserve them? Where have we prioritized individual autonomy over community connection, and what has been the cost? Third, we experiment with adaptations appropriate to our contexts. Maybe you can't restructure your entire society around a moiety system, but you can build intentional communities that prioritize reciprocal relationships over isolated individualism. Maybe you can't host a traditional potlatch, but you can examine how your own celebrations and gatherings might emphasize giving over keeping, contribution over consumption. Maybe you can't carve a totem pole, but you can think about how to embed your community's important stories in practices and places where they can't be forgotten. Fourth, we support Tlingit sovereignty and cultural revitalization. If these teachings move you, consider how you can materially support Tlingit communities in their work to maintain their languages, protect their territories, repatriate their sacred objects, and pass their knowledge to new generations. Cultural wisdom doesn't exist in the abstract. It lives in people and places that need resources, respect, and political support. There's a tension here we must navigate carefully. On one hand, Tlingit wisdom speaks to universal human experiences: the need for balance, the challenge of maintaining equality, the problem of preserving cultural memory, the question of what we owe each other. These are problems every human society must solve somehow, and the Tlingit solutions offer genuine insights applicable beyond their specific context. On the other hand, these practices are not universal templates. They grew from specific landscapes, specific histories, specific worldviews. They belong to Tlingit people in ways that can't be simply transferred to others. The same cedar trees that provide carving material, the same salmon runs that generate surplus for potlatching, the same social structures that make moiety division meaningful. These are particular to the Pacific Northwest coast and the peoples who have lived there for thousands of years. The wisdom lies in holding both truths simultaneously. Yes, we can learn from Tlingit examples. No, we cannot simply copy their practices. Yes, their principles address universal human needs. No, the specific forms these principles take are not ours to claim. This tension is productive. It forces us to do the hard work of developing our own solutions, inspired by but not identical to what we've learned. It requires us to understand deeply rather than superficially appropriating. It demands respect for the particular while remaining open to the universal. Let me leave you with one more teaching, a way of understanding how Tlingit wisdom continues to evolve and speak to new circumstances. In recent decades, Tlingit communities have held healing potlatches, ceremonies specifically designed to address collective trauma from the boarding school era, from cultural suppression, from the ongoing impacts of colonization. These aren't traditional potlatches in the sense of being thousands of years old. They're adaptations, taking the fundamental structure, gathering the opposite moiety, witnessing, feeding, giving, creating obligation, and applying it to modern needs. At these healing potlatches, elders who survived boarding schools tell their stories publicly, witnessed by the younger generations who need to understand this history. The witnesses receive gifts, but the gifts themselves are transformed, sometimes including written materials documenting boarding school experiences, photographs of ancestors, recordings of language and songs that were almost lost. The form is ancient, but the content addresses contemporary needs. This is living culture, not frozen in some imaginary pristine past, but continuously adapting while remaining rooted in foundational principles. The moiety system structures the gathering. The potlatch economy creates the framework. The oral traditions, now supplemented by written and recorded materials, preserve and transmit knowledge. Everything we've explored, the dual organization, the gift economy, the embedding of meaning in practice, comes together to help communities heal from historical trauma while maintaining cultural continuity. This is what wisdom looks like when it's truly alive, flexible enough to address new challenges while remaining grounded in enduring truths. And so I leave you with an invitation, not to become Tlingit. You cannot unless you are born into it. But to let Tlingit wisdom question your assumptions, challenge your worldview, and open possibilities you may not have considered. The next time you feel proud of your independence, ask yourself, what relationships have I sacrificed in pursuit of self-sufficiency? And what might I gain by accepting healthy interdependence? The next time you're tempted to accumulate more than you need, ask yourself, what would it feel like to measure wealth by what you give rather than what you keep, and who might benefit if you did? The next time you think of art as mere decoration or entertainment, ask yourself, what stories does my community need to preserve, and how might we embed them in practices that ensure they're never forgotten? The next time you seek consensus and agreement, ask yourself, what might I learn from opposition, and how might built-in duality create healthier balance than forced uniformity? These questions won't give you easy answers. They shouldn't. Easy answers lead to superficial appropriation. Deep questions lead to genuine transformation, not of Tlingit culture into something more acceptable to the dominant society, but of the dominant society into something more aligned with principles of balance, reciprocity, and relationship that human beings have known work for thousands of years. The raven and the eagle still fly above the inside passage. The salmon still run silver through the rivers. The cedar trees still grow in the rainforest, impossibly massive, impossibly old. The Tlingit people still gather in clan houses, still host potlatches, still carve totem poles, still pass down stories that have been told for hundreds of generations. The world has changed around them in ways that would be unrecognizable to their ancestors from even 200 years ago. Climate change alters the very landscape. Modern economies intrude on traditional territories. English threatens indigenous languages. Federal and state governments impose laws that contradict traditional governance. Yet the moiety system persists. Raven and eagle still organize society, still govern marriage, still structure ceremonies, still provide identity and belonging. The principles endure because they're not arbitrary rules, but insights into the nature of balance itself. This is the final mystery unveiled. The most ancient wisdom is also the most modern, because truth about human nature and social organization doesn't become obsolete. It only gets forgotten and must be remembered, generation after generation, by those brave enough to look beyond the dominant paradigm and ask what other ways of being human might be possible. The Tlingit answer with their lives, their continued practice of traditions that governments tried to erase, their insistence that there are other ways to organize economy, society, art, and identity. They answer not with arguments, but with example. The example of a culture that has survived everything thrown at it while maintaining its fundamental character. And now the question comes to us, what will we do with what we've learned? Will we dismiss it as interesting anthropology, exotic stories from a faraway culture? Or will we let it genuinely challenge us, opening our eyes to possibilities we've been told are impossible, to wisdom we've been taught to ignore, to ways of being human that might still show us how to build societies that work not just for the few, but for everyone? The raven and the eagle wait for your answer, circling in the sky above waters that have run with salmon since the Ice Age ended, calling across forests that have stood since before cities were dreamed of, carrying wisdom that has proven its worth across 10,000 years. Listen to their calls, learn from their balance. Let their example inspire not imitation, but creation. The creation of communities that honor relationship over isolation, that celebrate giving over hoarding, that preserve wisdom in living practice, that understand identity as something we hold in common, rather than something we claim in separation. This is the teaching. This is the invitation. This is the ancient wisdom that speaks to our modern crises with a voice that won't be silenced, that can't be erased, that continues to call us toward ways of being human that we've almost forgotten, but might still remember if we're willing to listen. The mystery of Raven and Eagle isn't fully revealed in 90 minutes or 90 hours. It unfolds across lifetimes, across generations, across the endless dance of balanced opposites that creates and sustains all life. But now you know where to look. Thank you for journeying with us into the world of the Tlingit people. If this wisdom moved you, consider supporting Indigenous cultural revitalization efforts and learning more about the ongoing work of Tlingit communities to preserve and adapt their traditions for future generations.